with all the chaos going around in the world, whatever the problems that you're dealing with, it doesn't mean that it's going to go away tomorrow. It's a mindset. It will look better in the morning. Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Ronin Leadership Podcast. This is Mike Howard. It's been a while since I've done one of these. I've been really putting the meat to bones on editing of the next Jack Trench novel that should be coming out. I'm trying to get it out before the end of the year, so I've been really heads down in working on that, finishing up that book, and now in the heavy editing process. But I want to thank all of you for your continued support for this channel. We're continuing to get subscribers. So please continue to hit the like button, the share button. Please make comments and also subscribe if this is your first time listening to this and this is some content that would help you in your leadership journey or just your life's journey. Just please comment and please subscribe. And also, please go to mikehowardauthor.com. You can find all the resources at your disposal when it comes to the books that I have out for sale, the 2 leadership books and the 2 Jack Trench action thrillers, and also available to speak when you want me to. I just had a wonderful experience, my wife and I, in New Mexico at an event called Consult. It's a security conference. The first time in New Mexico, which was awesome. It's just such a beautiful state. And those of you who've been there, you know what I'm talking about. We got to do some hot air ballooning. They had a great spouse program, so Janice had a great time, made new friends. And it was just gratifying. I spoke on leadership, and it was really good. It was a really good time. So I've been busy with some of that as well. But I want to spend just a few minutes. This won't be a long podcast, but just spend a few minutes talking about the correlation between the election results from last week and leadership. Now, I did a recent podcast on leading up to the elections on policy versus personality. And I've had a lot of interesting discussions over the years with people who, they hate Donald Trump so much that they're willing to put away their conservative beliefs and vote for somebody whose policies they're opposed to, but they don't like Trump. And my argument was, I personally don't believe, when you look at it from a leadership perspective, Trump displays a lot of the leadership qualities that I've been talking about for years, right? To be selfless and practice humility and all these other kind of things that Trump is not. But from a policy perspective, I can get behind him, and so, we've had these debates with people, personality versus policy. And my argument is that you should always vote policy, even if you have to hold your nose when you're in the voting booth or you're doing the check mark on the mail-in ballot. You have to vote on those things that you believe are best for the country. Forget who the vessel is, whether it was Kamala Harris or whether it was Donald Trump. What's best for the country. So that was that podcast, and actually got a lot of really good reviews and some comments, and not everybody agrees with it, but we'll put a link into that podcast. If you haven't seen it, you can take a look at it, because they were just kind of my thoughts on things. But now the election is over, and Donald Trump is president, and people are losing their minds. I mean, you got people, grown adults, that I'm going to shave my head, I'm not going to have sex for 4 years, I'm going to leave the country, whatever it is. And there's such parallels to leadership, and that's what I want to really talk about today. I really don't want to get into the politics, and whatever your politics are. If you voted for Kamala Harris and you voted because you believe she'd be the best person to be president, more power to you. I'm happy for you. If you voted, I'm happy that you voted that way. I know you're not feeling good about this, obviously, with Trump and the Republicans in office and owning, all 3 parts of the government. and we'll get back to that. Obviously, if you voted for Trump, then you're elated because you're hoping that those policy issues that led you to vote for him will come to fruition. But you put all that aside, there's some really interesting leadership dynamics here that I think all of you should pay attention to. And a lot of this comes from what Colin Powell and his 13 rules, and I've talked about that for years. And those of you who know me know that I'm really a big fan of the late General and Secretary of State Colin Powell. And I think he was a consummate leader. And I'm really, really, I get solace, consolation when I go and look at those 13 rules every so often, and just the wisdom of who this man was in terms of his legacy as a patriot, as a citizen, and as a leader. But one of the things that came to mind is that you have to accept reality. Part of the problem with a lot of the folks that didn't vote for Trump, for instance, they won't accept the reality that he won. They can't get over that. And it's causing them to all kinds of negative behaviors, right? They're depressed, or they're anxious, or they're angry, and they can't get over the fact that the election's over. A big part of the electorate spoke, and Trump won, whether you like it or not. So from a leadership lesson, number one is you have to accept reality. The analogy is, and I talked about this in we'll also put a link to, I have a blog called Ronan Leadership Thoughts. And prior to the election, I did a pretty large piece on policy versus personality. But you have to accept reality. And one of the examples I gave in the blog post was, I'm back at Microsoft. I'm Chief Security Officer. And there's like two different scenarios. Let's say we asked for a budget because my team and I have gotten together over a period of months, and we've decided on a budget that we need for the next fiscal year to drive, say our top 3 priorities, whatever they are. And it goes to goes up to our controller, and it goes all the way to CFO's office, and then they've got to make the big Uber decision. And we come back and we find out that we asked for this much and we got this much, because from an operational expense point of view, OPEX, that's what the CFO's office decided. And not just for us, but for every organization that is under that, in the company. So then I've got to regroup with my team. And obviously we're disappointed because, we wanted to do these 3 things, and now we don't have the resources. So now, what do? You sit and cry about it. You don't accept it. It's not fair. We've done such great work in the past. Why don't they recognize that? And why don't we get the full, tranche of money? Well, we didn't. So now, as a leadership team, and I as the ultimate leader, I've got to set the tone. Yes, we're disappointed, but we have to move forward. And so now, instead of this, we have this. What can we do with this? Now we have to reprioritize. What comes off the plate, right? What are the things that we really need to concentrate on? Okay? And so that's kind of one scenario. But you have to accept reality, and you have to move on and make decisions for the betterment of the organization. Another example is if the C-suite decides they need to make headcount reductions, right? Reductions in force. And every organization in the enterprise has to take some cuts. And finally it gets down to us, and my boss tells me, hey, for you, global security, you're gonna have to eliminate 3 headcount. I don't like it. I don't think it's fair. And at this point in time, and this happened to me a couple times where I didn't have any fat in my organization. We got rid of the folks that were the non-performers or the malcontents and whatever. So we had a pretty switched on, lean team, right? And then I've got to make cuts. So I go back to my leadership team, and we've got to go through it. And of course, the same conniptions go through. It's not fair, blah, 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 blah. And you've got people that can't accept it. And then we have to fight it out and determine who in my organization has to go. We got to really have to stack rank. And these are difficult decisions. It's hard decisions to make because you're talking about good people that are contributing to your organization, and you've got to find 3 people to let go. Is it fair? No, it's not fair. But leaders have to accept the reality of the situation. And we had to do the hard work of coming up with 3 names. And it was hard. And, there were some hard feelings, hard discussions. Ultimately, I had to call the ball in determining whether it comes from this part of my organization or this part of my organization. And if I say this part, right, then that leadership team person under my command is going to be upset. And that's just part of the course. They have to be upset, but they also have to learn that we don't have a choice. You got to move on. It's just like with this election. Those of you who, especially if you're in a leadership position, you have to learn to live with the hand that's been dealt you and move on. Just keep moving forward. You can sit here and cry till the cows come in, right? As they say. It's not going to change anything. You may say it's unfair, or I don't like it, and I don't like him, and the country's going to hell in a handbasket. Yet to be determined, but at the end of the day, the electorate has spoken. So move on. As a leader, accept reality. The other piece of it is, and if you're finding this, it's actually amusing to watch. I really wasn't watching news. My wife and I, for a long time leading up to the elections, because I just got tired of the partisan stuff, whether it's Fox News, MSNBC, CNN, what have you. I mean, we get our news, like a lot of people now, from streaming, from different sources, just to figure out what's going on. And there's actually a very good source for all of you. It's called Ground Truth. It is a wonderful way to get your news, because it tells you up front if there's an issue, if there's an issue about something, and there are multiple articles from multiple sources, Ground Truth will take those and they'll evaluate whether or not this article leans left, leans right, or is in the middle. And it gives you the choice to kind of read each side of the equation and then look at the one in the middle. And it's a really good source. So Ground News, if you haven't heard of it, it's really good. It beats the heck out of the idiots on the talking heads in the major legacy news, which have started to implode and lose a lot of money. Apparently CNN, MSNBC, some of these legacy outlets have lost viewership up big time post-election. And people are tired of that. But getting back to like politicians and ego. So Colin Powell had a great phrase in one of his 13 rules for leadership. Don't let your ego get so close to your position that when your position falls, your ego goes with it. Beautiful, beautiful line. And that's what's been happening here, whether it's the electorate that voted for Kamala Harris or whether it's Democratic politicians. They let their egos get so close to their position. They were so sure that they were right and that everyone in the country would go along with them, that when on election night it turned out to be quite the opposite, their ego went down with it, right? So and this harkens back to the first one, the first point too, about accepting reality. If you are so wedded to a particular strategy, like in business, if back in global security days, if we embarked on a particular strategy, and we were so sure it was going to work, and let's say it didn't, and let's say that from an ROI perspective, we were not moving the ball forward in terms of protecting the company. We were deluding ourselves in thinking that what we conceptualized didn't come to fruition. What do you do as business people, especially if you're in a profit center side of the house, where you have to have more P's than L's, right? As I always say, if you roll down, keep going forward with a strategy, and it's losing money, it's bleeding resources, you as a leader and your organization, you have to stop. You have to regroup and say, wait a minute, I think we made a mistake and we need to go in this direction. We've been going this direction, but it's not bearing fruit. Let's take stock of what went wrong and let's try this other direction. And what you're seeing now, especially from a lot of the talking heads, and a lot of the folks in the Democratic Party especially, is not all of them. There's some of them that are thinking with their noggin, and they're saying, you know what, if a vast majority of the country went from blue to red, maybe there's something we as a party need to look at, our policies, our stances on different issues, and kind of be introspective. But you're not seeing that from the vast majority of folks on the left. You're seeing a lot of finger pointing. At who? At us, at the electorate. Oh, it's their fault. It's misogynistic, or you're homophobic, or you're racist, or you're ill-informed. We should have gotten the message out better, then you would have gotten it. As opposed to, and some of that is probably valid. I'm sure, obviously, there are people out there in the world, not U.S., that are homophobic, misogynistic, racist, or they didn't get the message. But I would argue that the vast majority of Americans are not like that, especially those that 4 years ago voted for Biden-Harris and this year voted for Trump. Something happened, right? And so when you see Democratic leaders or talking heads pointing fingers at us, it tells you that they put their ego so close to their position that when the position fell, their ego went with it. And so as a leader, in that scenario I talked about, when you have to regroup and you have to be honest with yourself and say, man, that particular strategy that we've been, it's not working. We have got to regroup and course correct. That's incumbent upon leaders to do that. And that's why this whole thing watching, and so now I was telling you, I got off on a tangent with Ground News. We weren't watching it for a long time, but post-election, we've been watching a lot of it. All of them, Fox, CNN, MSNBC, CNBC, all of them. And it's been interesting to watch. And you have grown adults, educated, that are losing their minds, that totally are losing their minds and are believing the worst of us, the American electorate, as opposed to looking at yourselves. If you supported Harris, for instance, and Waltz, and you obviously didn't win, why? So from a business perspective, you have to really, really be introspective. Leaders are inherently introspective. You're always questioning whether, yes, you have to have the confidence to move forward on strategy, especially if you believe you're right. But if empirical evidence, shows you that you're heading in the wrong direction, you've got to take a stock and say why. Because it's good. It's for the betterment of the enterprise, for your own organization, and for the greater good for in this case, my case, Microsoft, right? And so you have to be able to put that ego aside and deal. And again, there's a symbiotic relationship between accepting reality and being able to course correct, right? And getting your ego out of the equation. And the problem with a lot of people post-election, they can't get the ego out of the equation. They can't fathom that whatever their policies are, on the left especially, right? They can't fathom that, the rest of the country doesn't buy off on what we're buying off on. So it's got to be them. And we need to message and tell them in a better way the truth that as we know it, and then they'll come around, as opposed to, well, maybe some of our stances on immigration or some of our stances on the woke stuff or whatever it is that turned a lot of people from blue to red, maybe that's it. And if you can't deal with that reality, then you'll never move forward. And same with business. If you can't deal with the reality of the situation, and if you just firmly believe that you're right and just let's go forward, this is what's going to happen. A perfect example was at the beginning of the Biden administration when they wanted to get out of Afghanistan. The last couple of administrations have wanted to get out of Afghanistan. We've been in that war long enough. And many of you who are listening have served there in Afghanistan and know people brothers and sisters who've been wounded or killed there. And so, yeah, it was time to go. But again, President Biden had a timetable. He wanted to meet that timetable regardless of whether or not what the ground truth was, that it should have taken more time, more planning to get it done correctly. And you saw what happened. The chaos at the airport, Afghanis, clinging onto airplanes as we're taking off, 13 U.S. service people killed, and it shouldn't have happened had we done it in a more methodical, thoughtful manner. And Taliban has retaken everything, and they've gotten a lot of our equipment. And that was 4 years ago, right? But again, your ego got so close, the president's ego got so close to his position that when his position fell, his ego went with it. He didn't know how to course correct. And you have to course correct. When facts smack you in the head and say, you're going the wrong direction, then course correct. I think the third thing, and this is something I want to end more of on a positive note, is Colin Powell said that it would look better in the AM. Now, he was not a Pollyanna kind of person, right? Remember, this was a man that served in Vietnam. He was an Army Ranger, Chairman, Joint Chiefs of Staff, advisor to presidents, and then Secretary of State. So the man knew leadership, and he lived in the real world. But I loved this one leadership tip from him was that it'll look better in the AM. With all the chaos going around the world, whatever the problems that you're dealing with, it doesn't mean that it's going to go away tomorrow. It's a mindset. It will look better in the morning. That means every morning you come in, and even though the same bullshit problems, if this is the problem from yesterday, and you went home that night and this same problem is here, well, guess what? You can approach it with a different mindset. Like, okay, the problem is still here, but I'm fresh. I got a good night's sleep, and I prayed on it, or whatever is your thing, and I'm going to tackle this, and it will look better in the AM. And I think when you look at the election, a lot of people need to think about that. It will look better in the AM. It'll look better tomorrow. 4 years ago, when Biden-Harris won, I suspect there are a whole lot of people that were Republicans or conservatives that weren't having a good day right after the election, right? Or the day after. They didn't lose their minds like you see a lot of people nowadays going really crazy, but they were probably not feeling that good. But they themselves had to learn that it will look better in the AM, and it will. And so as a leader, whatever situations you are faced with in your organization, you have to realize that it will look better in the AM at some point, that you will get through this. And one of the things I draw strength from is from studying Stoicism. One of the tenets of Stoicism is that there's nothing new, right? So whatever problem you're facing, whether it's a business issue or personal issue, medical issue, whatever it is, you have tackled issues before like that in your life, and you're here. You survived. You've pushed through it. And I look at my career at CIA and Microsoft. And when I got to Microsoft, and when I was faced with, especially my first, let's say, 5-6 years, where I had been 22 years in government, and I knew the DNA of CIA and how the government works cold, right? For any of you, you get it. And I go now to private enterprise, and I'm still trying to figure the enterprise out. And I would be hit with some problem, whether it was a budget issue, a personnel issue, operational issue. But what I realized was that this was not my first rodeo. Like, these problems were in a different place. It was Microsoft, but I dealt with these kind of problems before at CIA, especially in leadership positions. And so as daunting as that particular issue at the time at Microsoft was, I could take a step back. And this is well before I was studying Stoicism. I could take a step back and say, I've done this before. I have experience in dealing with, bean counters, or I have experience dealing with, really bad personnel issues, or I have experience having to course correct on a strategy that's not working, and I've got to still push the ball forward, and we're going to go in a different direction. So when Colin Powell says it will look better in the AM, it will look better in the AM. It's a mindset. So keep that mindset going. So those are the things I just really wanted to get across. I said it was going to be short, but like I said, post-election, there's a huge part of the population that are losing their minds, and they can't accept the reality of what the electorate said. And so when you parallel that with business, as a business leader, remember, number one, accept reality. You don't sugarcoat it. It is what it is. Whatever your situation is, a budget cut, a reduction in force, and you have to get rid of people. Whatever your situation is, and it's on your desk, accept it and deal with reality, or get out of the leadership position. Because if you can't handle that, then you should find something else to do. Leadership is hard. It's never going to be easy. There are a lot of great benefits to being a leader, seeing a strategy that you came up with come to fruition, seeing direct reports that you have mentored taking leadership positions themselves, seeing your organization thrive and have a good reputation, not only within your particular enterprise or company, but outside in the industry. Those are all wonderful things, right? Great things. But you got to take the good with the bad. And the bad is, the personnel issues, the things that you make, mistakes you make, that your organization makes, budget cuts, all these things. Accept reality, move forward, and deal with it. And then get your ego out of the equation. You're finding a lot of these politicians pointing fingers at us, like I said, at the electorate. It's our fault that Donald Trump got in. No, it's not our fault. It's your fault, your policies, perhaps. You should look at that. And for those of you who are listening to this who may be leaning left, don't take offense. I'm just trying to tell you the truth. If you keep pointing fingers at the electorate or at circumstances beyond your control, you'll never get to the heart of why this country went from blue to red. There are things there. I'm not going to get into it because I'm not making this a political thing. I'm just trying to make an analogy between business and politics. But you got to get real. All right? So remember what Colin Powell said. Don't let your ego get so close to your position that when your position falls, your ego goes with it. And then the third thing, it will get better. It'll look better in the morning if you have that mindset. If you have that mindset that, oh, woe is me, it will never get better. Things will never get better. This is the way the world is going to be, and it's a dark place, and the United States is a bad place now, and I'm just going to bury my head in the sand for 4 years. Well, go ahead, do that. You're not going to help yourself or your country or your community. Or you can have a different mindset. And if you were against Trump and you were for Harris, good. Then A, deal with the reasons why, and then get out there in the community and try to make things better so that in 4 years, your candidate will win, perhaps. But you have to have that mindset. It will look better in the morning if you allow yourself to think that way. So that's it. That's all I have for today. I'd be happy to hear your comments on this, and just let me know what you think. I don't necessarily want to get political, but I think this election was very important in many aspects, and it's brought out so much angst and emotions on both sides that I think it's worth looking at it from a leadership perspective. Please continue to hit the subscribe button, the like button. Give me your comments, whether you agree with what I said or don't agree. I'd love to have an engagement with you. Go to MikeHowardAuthor.com and stay tuned. The new Jack Trench novel will be coming out really soon. So thanks again for your sponsorship and your support for this channel. And until next time, we'll talk at you.